again, keep on eating. I'm a wanderer. I'm going to wander around a little bit. Delighted to be here. It's been really fun to be part of what the symposium's about so far. And probably no one would go to a presentation about low impact or average. Any of you have a low impact or average mentoring program? Okay. Thank you for your honesty. We'll fix that by the end, okay? Most of us spend a lot of time on it, and we want it to be great. But we don't talk enough about what great looks like. So I'm going to dump a lot of information at you in the time that we have together. Keep on eating. I've got a Dilbert comic. I like Dilbert. I'll let you read this. Love Dilbert. So I do a lot of talks about mentoring all over the country. I've got my notes here to wander around. And it ends up that a lot of folks are sort of unclear about mentoring. So the first part of what I want to talk to you about is that. So there I was a few years ago with a whole room. It was actually it was supposed to be, it was a conference. How many of you have ever been to the Mentoring Institute in New Mexico? Anyone in this group? Okay, a few people. It was a room for about 20 people, and it was packed with like 40 in there. We were talking about evaluating mentoring, and I was asking people what they thought mentoring was. And one person said they thought mentoring could also be a parent. How many of you think that? Mentoring could be a parent. Like, raise your hands like you're proud of believing that. Okay, so some of you think that. Some of my background is I'm from North Carolina, but I've spent the last about 8 years in Arizona before moving back to North Carolina, and I had a lot of students there who are Hispanic, and they often use the word parent when they talk about like a mentor. So to them, even though I would disagree with them all the time, I was their academic mother. So for some groups, sort of this parental relationship is how they think about mentoring. However, we had a big debate that ensued because, how many of you think a parent could be a mentor? Yeah? Okay. Why do you think that? Like, how is a parent different than a mentor? Okay, no, she's like, I'm not sure. You just put me on the spot. I'm like finishing my rice bowl. Anybody have any thoughts? How is a parent different than a mentor? Yes?
A parent usually has a lot more of themselves invested in what their child is and what their dreams are for that child.
Okay, so they're more invested in the mentor would be? Yes, what do you think? So it's the different power relationship for sure, although we could argue about how much there is in mentoring relationships. But let's get one more. There was somebody back here. Yes, I waited till you stuffed all that food in there.
I was going to say that parents have power.
Parents have power, which is what we were just talking about. Okay, well, the conversation at that time was like, well, if we define every relationship as the same as mentoring, why do we have a different word for mentoring if it doesn't mean something that's different? So a few years later, I found myself at another conference, this time with Arizona Assurance Scholars. They were all low income or underrepresented. There were about 1,000 of them. I did all the training for the mentees for that program, and I asked them what they thought mentoring was. And sort of to my horror, they thought it was a therapist. Now, I don't know about you, I am a psychologist by training, but if I thought my mentor was a therapist, I'm not so sure I'd be down with going to see that person if I'd never met them before. And I began to understand why they might have some concerns about going to see their mentor, because that was some problem. Attrition was a problem in that. The third presentation I want to tell you about was just a couple years ago. This time I had about, 200 faculty members, and I had been brought into this institution to talk with them about mentoring graduate students. And I thought faculty are a pretty smart group. They all have PhDs, so I asked them what they thought the origin of the word mentor was. Not one of them knew. So I appreciated the talk earlier today because I think it is important to kind of understand the legacy of the terms that we use. And I have, after that, decided that no presentation I would give would people leave not knowing the origin. So does anybody here know the origin of the word mentor? Yes?
It's Greek.
Greek?
Homer's Odyssey.
Yeah. Pretty impressive. Okay. Now there's another piece about that. I want to, Daniel, Daniel's got it going on here. You guys should all meet Daniel. So it absolutely came from Western culture, from the Greeks, but there was one other piece about it. Every time mentor gave advice, he was actually inhabited by the goddess, we call her Athena, but Minerva. So even in the beginning, it was this androgynous notion about mentoring. Did you know that?
It's all coming back.
It's coming back to you now. Did anyone know that? So even if they tell you it was mentor, it wasn't a he. Every time mentor actually gave advice, it was a woman. If I was going to be a goddess, and sometimes people act like if you're going to be goddess of the universe, I would totally be Athena. She is a mentoring goddess. So there are also origins of mentoring in other cultures, and especially given some of your interests and the talks that you had earlier, I think it would behoove you to find out sort of what are these mentor-like archetypes in those cultures. So where I was in Arizona, Navajo and Hopi, as Hopi have Spider Woman as an important mentor sort of like analogy, and it would be helpful for you to think about what would resonate with their groups that you work with as you think about it. I go to conferences where all we do is argue about what mentoring is. Are any of you confused at all? I mean, I'm just wondering, maybe you have a very, let me ask it that way. Who has a pretty precise definition that you feel really good about in your program? Not one group? Not one person? Come on. No. Are you just embarrassed because you think I'm going to come over there and ask you now and then? All right, well, I don't believe that one of you don't have such a term. I'm going to run through some ways to think about mentoring. I'm just looking to see if I feel like there's somebody. Did anybody know the generally accepted definition of mentoring? We sort of normally define it. Let's hear what you say. Since you have such a crappy mentoring program, we want to know. He's the one who had the one. He's only one. Let's hear it. What's your name?
Jeff.
Jeff. Okay, Jeff.
So the way that I see mentoring is being a guide or someone who helps someone to succeed.
Being a guide. You just defined a mentor. But a person who helps
so
someone.
Mentoring is guiding and helping.
Okay, guiding and helping others to succeed. Could that someone be more experienced than you?
Totally.
Okay, they could be. Thank you. You got a mic? Yeah, because sometimes I have audience participation. Thank you. You're pretty close. The common accepted one is that a mentor is a more experienced person who's providing some guidance and support to a less experienced individual. They also even had usually an older person, but not always. They've sort of taken that out. Well, I'm going to give you 3 ways to think about mentoring because one of my main points to you is it's really important to be clear what mentoring means to you in your program, because if you're not, everything else falls down. How will you recruit the right people? How will they know what they should be doing? So really having some clarity about what mentoring is important. Actually, these are some mentoring scholars. I'm in the bottom left. This is at the New Mexico Mentoring Institute. Nora Dominguez there. She's the president of the International Mentoring Association. Anyone heard of that? Gosh, okay, yay. I'll send you guys some information about that. This is David Clutterbuck, who got me to just co-edit a book on mentoring. These are some other folks, the Serbys and Gloria. Anybody know Gloria Crisp? I know Todd does. I just met him. She's here at Oregon State. She's not in the picture, but she talks there. One of the ways we define mentoring is who the people are. We say, oh, that's your advisor or your doctoral supervisor, and therefore they must be your mentor. And they have these certain traits. I looked up once the traits of mentoring. I was a little bit overwhelmed. It was such a positive, amazing person. Like, I don't know anyone who has all of those traits. If any of you ever find a person, I want you to let me know. Even good mentors have bad days. But one way to think about it is sort of who the people are. And one way I want to expand your thinking about it a little bit is networks. So we have in the past thought a lot about this traditional definition as this one-on-one relationship, but increasingly in today's flatter hierarchy, one person can't do it all. And it's really important to have what we call a relational network, developmental network, mentoring mosaics. There's different terms, but I would really encourage you to think of more than one person when you're thinking about people, and if that has a place in your program. I have a niece that I think I have a picture in here of her in a little bit. Super cute, and the minute she came out, I liked her. Right? If you have children, it's the same way. They come out, no one else likes them, they're screaming. I got grandkids, you like the diaper, take them back. So we all have ways we start relationships. Now, if it's one you're sort of born into with the family, you don't get a lot of choice. It is who it is. And you mostly kind of start off liking them, loving them. Maybe sometimes I hear people say, well, I love them, I don't like them very much. But if you think about your significant other, you got to first get together. And then there's this period of cultivation and things happen, and then maybe there's an end, period. And so mentoring, especially if you're talking about formal mentoring, how many of you work with formal mentoring programs versus informal? Formal is there's some activity going on to connect people. How many of you work with informal ones? Okay. Even naturally occurring or informal relationships also have this process. The reason this is important is different things need to happen at those stages. I would argue to you that these issues of diversity that you were hearing about earlier matter most when? When do you think diversity matters? She's like, don't even.
I think it
always matters? Okay. Who thinks that? How many of you think it always matters? You got a lot of friends in here. They're kind of like timid, but they're like, how many of you think it doesn't always matter? Okay, a few people. I would argue that it matters most at the initiation. Because if you can't connect, that's when it gets in the way and people get out. Not that it doesn't matter to the person, but to the relationship itself. After they get first that initial stage, then they find things in common, and the relationship will propel itself forward. So I would argue to you that it matters most at the beginning. And when people get stuck or the issues of differences break those relationships, it's at the beginning. So having some consideration about that it's a process, not just a person. I'm working on some things in Wilmington right now with, I'm going to leave this here. If I forget, you'll remind me, because I sometimes go, where did I put that? Okay, you're in charge. Okay. They sucked me into working with this mentoring program, and I'm consulting with them, and suddenly they also assigned me a mentee, which I was not prepared for, but that was okay. So I'm in, but just because they assigned me didn't mean that person thought of me as her mentor. So we often make that mistake in a program. We assign people and we're like, oh yay, we've assigned them, mentoring's happening. No, it's a process. So just really remembering and being intentional about that is important when you think about what it is to your program. And are you most working in the beginning stages? Or the middle part when things are happening, and then the ending, I would say people neglect the end. And ends are important. You should celebrate them, especially for formal programs, and have some signal that now we're going to not be formal anymore, and how might we still want to stay connected. Okay, the third, and I would argue the most important way to think about mentoring is what we do. It's behaviors. And this is where, if you're here at Oregon State, you should totally go hang out with Gloria Crisp. She actually has done a college student mentoring scale. Is anybody familiar with that? So Todd here is going to be the expert. I actually pulled her functions and broke them into psychosocial and career. Because who here are working with undergraduates? Anyone working with graduate students? Some of you. What? Any other groups other than those two? Faculty, is anybody doing like faculty mentoring of other faculty? Okay, so it's all pretty much students. So this would be very important for you. So mentoring, we think about behaviors like what do people do with each other. The reason I would argue it's not a parental relationship, the way it's different, is it's more than friendship. So the psychosocial support is an important part of mentoring. And Gloria would say the pieces are this role modeling, and also this psychological and emotional support, confidence building, listening. And here's the thing. I'm going to tell you what research says. So, by the way, I'm a friendly critic of mentoring, so I might say some things that would go, oh, I'm not surprised she said that. You don't actually have to be approachable. People need to think you are. And this is especially important working with graduate students who often feel their faculty mentors, they can't go in to see them, they're unapproachable, and it creates this psychological distance, which is very problematic. So you actually don't have to be approachable, they just need to feel that they could come in if they needed to do so. Career support is the other, that's the way it's really different. If it's just career support and not psychosocial support, then you're more of like coach or supervisor. So there has to be this career support, and for students, it's the career of like figuring out their major. And this is again where Gloria is very helpful, because she says, well, in the college setting, it's degree and career support. What do I need for my degree? What internships, what activities, how do I, if I come in as a transfer student? And the other is the academic subject knowledge support. That these are really crucial elements. And I recommend her scale to you if you're thinking about some evaluation things, because she has some nice items about how to assess if these are actually happening. So I would say not to worry so much about people, but really think about the behaviors. What is it you want people to do together? Lately, researchers have been talking about quality, because the more I did work on mentoring, the more I found that most programs just aren't that good. And they certainly do have a positive effects. People tend to make more money, they tend to be more successful, they'll graduate, they have better graduation rates, but the effects aren't big. They're small effects. And we put a lot of resources in it. But when you tease out high-quality mentoring programs from low quality and medium, the effect size is much bigger. So that's why I think I have it behooves us to think, if we're going to spend all this time and energy, spending a whole day here at a symposium, then it should be fantastic what you're doing. So I want to draw your attention to this other way to think a little bit about mentoring, which is high quality. I want you to imagine, we're going to do a thought experiment. Are you ready? Imagine someone that you really like seeing at work or personally, and imagine seeing that person right now, and what are the first 3 words that pop to your mind? Like, think of what those 3 words are. She's already, well, okay, what are, you're smiling, think of this person. What are the 3 words? Friendly, productive,
And joyful.
and joyful, okay? So we got some positive emotion words. How about you guys? Do you not know anyone? Okay, positive. I was like, maybe you don't know. Okay. What else? Warm. Innovative. Available. Encouraging. What else? Authentic. What's yours?
Memory asks me about things that we interact about weeks later, months later.
Kind of shows some concern, cares enough about it that remembers it, brings it back up. Okay, so was this hard for anyone to think of someone that they feel really good seeing? No? And some of you started smiling. I could see it. All right, now we're going to do one more thought experiment. Ready? You know which way this is going, don't you? Now I want you to imagine someone that if you don't see them again, it will be too soon. But the last time that you saw this person who you cannot stand, what are a couple adjectives that pop to mind about that individual? She looked away, we won't pick on you. What you got? Do you have any adjectives? Somebody you don't like? Rude? Deceitful? Selfish, controlling? Makes assumptions that are probably wrong, I'm guessing. Okay. What about back there? Evil, yeah. Unstable, unpredictable is what some people say. So you can kind of, these are different set of words, and if we wrote them up on the board, they would show some very strong differences. And my point of doing this thought experiment is to show you that you can immediately recognize what a high quality relationship looks like and how it makes you feel. And what I want to give you are some ways to think about that for mentoring, because the more people understand what these are, the more likely they are to promote and engage in them. One is this emotional tone. Some of you are saying a lot of good words, but it builds resiliency so that you can also express, difficult conversations and give critical feedback. I know when I've worked with my graduate students, and imagine this, I study mentoring, and I'm their mentor, like, talk about navel gazing, right? I would have to give them papers, they're all written up. They don't like that. They don't like me very much when I do that. And if we don't have a strong enough relationship that they can kind of come back and understand that, it could be problematic. So that's what emotional tone is. You can, that's resiliency. You can handle difficulty, you come back and talk to each other even after some critical feedback. How many of you do peer mentoring programs? All right, I'm not going to talk a lot about this, but I wanted to ask you because it ends up peer mentors, the research says, don't give very good career feedback. They tend to focus more on that psychological support. So it's even more important in a peer mentoring program that they have some of this so they can learn to give some of that critical feedback about the career kind of activities. Emotional tone is being able to share the good and the bad, and it ends up that mentors are often less likely to share when something didn't go so well because they're concerned that they won't look as competent. But helping to educate them that, okay, you don't have to like bare your soul, but we can still share about when something didn't go so well and how you resolved it, and also celebrating those successes builds the capacity to have resiliency. And finally, the third one is what people often leave out. Openness, that these people are opening you to new ideas and new ways of thinking. If you're not going to be different at the end of that mentoring relationship, why bother? So how will they help you expand your network, enlarge your horizons? And being very deliberate about that. These are the qualities of when we've researched what's high quality mentoring relationships, these are the differentiators. So as you think about sort of what's your definition about mentoring, I would encourage you to also think about high quality. All right, how are we doing so far? And by the way, I forgot to tell you, you have a handout on your table to help you take notes. Ha! Should have told you that earlier. I know, anybody missing one? Because we can get you one. There's someone in the back. It's like the cheat sheet of what I thought. See, they figured it out. Anyway, this is on it. Yeah, that's what made me think of it. How far have we gotten on that thing? Okay, so there's all not lost. We're just at the beginning. Here's one other point I want to make to you, definitionally speaking. We often talk about, in my book I wrote about protege, but it could probably most of you use the word mentee. Does anybody use the word protege? Okay, one person does. It kind of depends on your context. But we often focus on the people, this protege and mentor, and we forget there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on, and you are the program managers. So it ends up that how you set up the context is important, how you're going to have people enter in these relationships, how you're going to support them, what you say the rules are. I want you to understand that you're creating the environment and have a huge impact on what that relationship's going to look like. So be aware of that, because these relationships just don't happen in a vacuum. Now, the naturally forming relationships is a little bit different. They might just sort of naturally come to one another. And then remembering, of course, that it's over time, so that we engage at what we call mentoring episodes, so people have sort of this mentor-like interaction. And after you have a certain number, you start to go, okay, I'm in a mentoring relationship. So just sort of remembering they come in with their own demographics, values, motivations, the baggage, I would say. And maybe that's good baggage, but sometimes it's bad baggage. Sometimes they've had bad previous relationships, and I think these can be especially derailing for underrepresented folks. So being aware that their example of what a mentoring relationship might look like might not be the greatest can help you also educate them about what it can be. So really having a sense that the mentoring is in this whole microcosm, Anybody heard of systems theory? Okay, I see some nods. So this is right straight out of that Bronfenbrenner's work. And we have this microsystem. All right, we doing okay? Any questions so far? All right, you're handling all these definitional issues. So my bottom line is I wouldn't worry a lot about what mentoring is generally, but think a lot about what it means in your program. And part of how you do that is you talk to your stakeholders. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So here's some takeaways. People have baggage, encourage networks. So even if you have a one-on-one, how many of you do just have sort of one-on-one mentoring programs? I would strongly encourage you to encourage that mentor to help that mentee develop a network of mentors or supporters, if you're not intentional about that now. Relationships develop over time, and that infrastructure that you have a large part in setting up matters. And I think I don't know that they use the terms exactly this way, but I would say issues about institutional racism, sexism, all those isms are important. And the thing I would say about diversity is make sure your program is not unintentionally supporting a status quo that you don't mean to support. This is when your infrastructure matters a lot. Your training, how you're recruiting people, and what outcomes you're expecting. And of course, as I mentioned for the peer mentoring, because peer mentors seem to struggle a little bit more giving that career advice, is make sure that that's happening there. All right, now I'm going to switch gears. We're going to talk about designing mentoring. So how many of you have an existing program now? Okay, and how many are like, I want to start something new? And how many are like, I'm going to take the old one and throw that out and start something new? Anybody like that? Well, I know, okay, we know, okay, that's good. You know, sometimes you should stop. Here's the problem. As a psychologist, anybody heard of sunk costs? Yeah, so you know you invest a lot, and you put a lot in it, and you should stop, but you don't, because you've put a lot in it, and you think, well, but next year it's going to be better. No. That's why you need to do evaluation. So I want to talk to you a little bit about designing mentoring. It all has to do with your theory of change, and I've consulted now with people all over in college, in businesses. I just had a meeting with a company last week. We want a mentoring program, Laura. I come in. I'm like, great. I'm all about mentoring. I'm your gal. What do you want to do? Well, we want a mentoring program. Yeah, but why do you want a mentoring program? Well, because it's my third quarter goal. Okay. Well, but who's it for? Why do you think mentoring? So my first message to you is doing this. If you haven't done it already, you should step back and think about your existing program or for your new one. Why? And take an hour to do this sometime with the people who are stakeholders in your program, and that would be the participants, anybody who has an interest, maybe a funder, somebody who has to provide you some resources. You should sit down with them. What is the goal of your mentoring program? And then proceed to pester yourself and others with a lot of why questions. Well, why is mentoring going to be what achieves this goal? So I have another story for you. I was running a workshop on something like this, and somebody said, well, they shared their goals. So we had like a whole day together. We worked on goals. Great. I said to her, what's your goal? She said, our goal is to get our alumni, she was proud of her goal too, get our alumni mentoring the students in our school. Okay, why? Well, because we want our students to connect with alumni. That sounds fantastic. Why? Well, because we want our students to get jobs. Okay, now I'm thinking we're getting somewhere, right? All right, well, so would it have to be alumni who are mentoring the students to help them get jobs? Could it be someone else? So we pressed on about why a lot, and at the end of the day, because she was in the alumni office, so I was kind of like, okay, why is the alumni office really going to be interested in getting students jobs, other than maybe then they'll become alumni and be involved in the alumni association? Anybody have any ideas? I heard some low mummers. Why? Donors, and I had to beat it out of her. But finally she was like, okay, I see what you're saying. Yes, at the end of the day, what we really want is our alumni to feel connected with our institution and to give back to the university, whether it's money, time, etc. There's nothing wrong with that goal, but it needed to be really clear about that's what's happening. And there could be a dual goal of also helping the students, but it's going to have a lot of implications in about who you're going to recruit, what they're going to do together, etc. So it's really important to think about why, and I'm going to give you some tools to do that. The other thing I would say about why is sometimes you find that, well, something else you could do would achieve those goals, and it'd be a lot easier than setting up a mentoring program, in which case you should do that thing. the workshop that these guys are at last year, that's the guy from Texas. You're all Oregon, right? So I can talk about Texans. Okay. He comes up to me at lunch and he said, after listening to you all morning, I'm thinking, I don't need a mentoring program. And we talked for a little bit, and I'm like, you're right. You're not ready. You don't have the resources to do it, and you could achieve what they were trying to do through their classes to support students. This on the worksheet. Mentoring outcomes. Research says these are the 6 categories that mentoring outcomes fall into. And I'm just going to talk you through them a little bit. Attitudinal, and attitudinal, if you're going to measure something, is the fastest to change. So, for example, the groups you're working with, what would be an example of an attitudinal outcome? Can anybody think of one? Maybe you have one. What is it?
About your institution.
Okay, pride, like how they, like pride, like they feel pride in it? Yes. I feel good, I feel more satisfied. What else would be an attitude? Aspirations to remain in school or in a major. That would also be an attitudinal measure. So now that I've had this mentor and whatever, I want to stay in science. Okay, behavioral. Anybody have an example of behavioral outcome?
Get people to show up.
Yeah, go say it again.
Get people to show up to your events, anything.
Yeah, just get them to come. If you're going to have a orientation event, that they've attended it. It could also be, I thought you were going to say go home to class. Because some programs are for retention. They're trying, so, okay, if they have a peer mentor, then they're going to come to class more, and through this will the things change. Yes, what's yours?
A lot of the mentoring that I do is with organizational skills, so staying on top of class assignments and other responsibilities would be a behavioral change.
Yeah, you could track that pretty easily. There's also career. So they did a resume. They've improved how to do a resume. They did a job shadowing interview. They've gotten a job. They've gotten an award, recognition. Health. A lot of the students you're working with, I could imagine health outcome might be important. Does anybody have health outcomes? I'm thinking stress. So if there's less stress at a transition, maybe for transfer students or new students, this is a health outcome, and the less stress makes them more able to get less sick, do better in school, pay more attention in class, etc. What would a motivational outcome be? And how would, I'm motivated now to do this thing differently. Is that what you mean? Yeah. So that might be, now I'm applying to these jobs, whereas before I wasn't going to, or I'm looking at positions that I wouldn't have looked at. So I'm more motivated to do that. And what about relational? I know all of you, if you do, and how many of you have some evaluation of your mentoring program? How many don't? The all-time most common measure I see is some version of I like my mentor. I'm satisfied with my mentor. This is often a relational outcome. And it's an important one, although I'm going to encourage you to go beyond just a relational measure. So when you're thinking about what's your goal, it should be tied somehow to, well, how will I know I've achieved that? And these are the outcomes. They did huge, what's called meta-analysis of all these studies, and these are the outcomes that showed that mattered for mentoring. I love that they said a logic model, and I don't know if they meant this. It's on the back of your handout. I left my watch on East Coast time, so I had to calculate for a second. How many of you seen a logic model before? Okay, I love logic models. If you don't have a logic model of your mentoring program, I highly recommend that you develop one, because you can get on one page what your theory of change is and shop it around to everybody. And the way it works is you first think about what are your assumptions and resources and inputs. That you're going to have a manager, that a certain number of people are going to want to participate, that you have access to people who could be mentors, any resources, even if it's your own time, you should calculate up what that is. And that's number one. Then you have these activities things that you support, maybe a recruitment event, and how many of you have that? How many of you have an orientation or briefing? How many of you train your mentors? How many of you train your mentees? Okay. How many of you have like events? I don't know, they have to meet. What are your events? They look very happy about their events over here.
A fall gathering or the viewing party.
Viewing party, fall gathering. Okay, that's a perfect event. Those resources and inputs and activities are the things you do. But then the other side of it are your intended results. So the outputs are all directly tied to the activities. And you should have an output for every activity. If you have a viewing event, you'd want to know how many people came to it, for example. Or if you have a briefing or an orientation of some sort, you can see how many people came, but you could also sort of have a little mini quiz to test their knowledge. So how many pairs you had. There's a wonderful program at Elmhurst College. They have to complete activity forms every time they meet. So that's one of the outputs of sort of the activities between the mentor, who's a career person, and the undergraduate. Whoops. And then it went crazy. These outcomes are what we were just talking about, protege work satisfaction, for example, or mentor listening skills. And then your impact is sort of these goals, your aspirations, your overarching reason you're doing this. I'm pretty sure I could guess most of them. Let me just see if I can. Increase people staying in school, getting jobs, and staying in a major of some sort. Does anybody have any other overarching goals for your mentoring program? Yes. Yes. Okay, what's yours?
Developing a sense of belonging for minority students.
And why do you wish to do that?
Because they often feel isolated on this campus.
And then what do they do? Do they drop out because of that feeling of isolation?
Sometimes, yeah.
I would argue that's all about retention.
It is.
And that the feeling of belonging is your theory of change. Mm-hmm. We get them together, they'll feel more they belong here, and they will stay in school. Mm-hmm. Is that a goal?
Yep.
So I would argue we're in agreement. Okay, what was up here?
I think it's similar to that idea of recruitment retention. It's a soft landing for folks who are coming from another country, so that they can have someone to connect with who has a similar experience to what they are going to be going through, and so they can get advice and sort of that initial connection.
And why do you want them to connect?
Retention, and satisfaction, and ability to have the behavioral change of how to know how to do things that may be different here than the way they expect.
Yeah, and I might say for international students, it might even be not just retention, but you want them to go to class and feel that they can do well in class as a way to stay in school.
And stay healthy.
Yeah, so the reason it's important to think about this is because it dictates what you would have people do and how you would train them. Because if all you said is, I want a sense of belonging, which might be fine, but then, okay, they could do all sorts of things. Do they have to belong here? Like, is there a reason they want to belong? Like, maybe I feel like I belong to the fraternity, sorority, and now I'm partying all the time. And I feel like I've really belonged, but I'm not really maybe paying as much attention to class as I should. Not to stereotype fraternity, sororities. I could have picked any other sorts of things. Athletics, for example. Well, only certain sports. Baseball. I love baseball, and I cannot figure out how students are able to be in school with like 5 million games they have in the spring. But I could feel I really belonged but didn't go to class. So this is why I say it's important to sort of think through what your ultimate outcome is, because it helps guide what you'll do. Are there any questions about this? All right, I'm going to run through really fast some things about recruiting, matching, and selection. Okay, you ready? And I am the fastest speaking Southerner that you will have ever met. So you just tell me if I get going too fast. Okay, here's some questions you should ask yourself about recruiting. Is participation required or voluntary, especially for sometimes incoming students? Must they participate in this if they're going to be in my program? I ran a scholarship program once, and the time I might not have said it, but the fact is, it was required. They all got a faculty mentor, so you should really think through that. And here's some different options for it. Content. What information needs to be in your recruitment materials? Because ideally, if you've done a good job describing your program, that's the best selection, is to not get people to apply for whom it would not be a good fit. I got an email just today, somebody saying, it's not going so well with their mentor-mentee. Can you help us figure out how to navigate that? It's a fit problem. So really thinking about your goals and communicating that, the expectations, and as much as you can put dates. How many of you have required dates or events for things? Do you put them out in advance? That's good. I see a lot of people who don't. So really having that up front is important. And requirements and benefits. So people often forget about benefits to mentors because you're recruiting sometimes mentors as well. And so letting them know how they can benefit from it is important. And then the process is pretty easy. Email, message. I should probably have texting now up there. I just hired a bunch of people, and all they do is text me, and I'm not used to having my work stuff in a text. So I want it in email or tweet. However, or what's the new thing? I just had a student in my office do this. It disappears after you do it. Snapchat. I was Snapchatted the other day. I was like, I don't even know what that is. So however it is, you get it out. And you should think about what's the avenues that your mentees and mentors use for information, especially you're at a university, having some thought about the natural calendar. I'm amazed at how often folks don't do that. And it's such a bad idea to send out recruitment materials during an exam period. No one will read that. And if you're trying to recruit faculty, I was working with a program and they were upset they couldn't get faculty, and I was a faculty member all the time at that time. I'm like, because they're all grading exams, they're not going to read that. They just deleted that email that you sent. So thinking about your group when you're sending out the information. Does anybody have any other ideas that they do that are really fantastic for recruitment? Yes.
Word of mouth or encourage your current mentors
to ask some
Word of mouth.
word of mouth, or asking your current mentors to think about who they know and encourage them to come, or come with that person to an orientation or a recruiting event or something.
Okay, that's great. And word of mouth works well when you have a group that you're trying to serve already. So that, and I'm sure that's the case for you. However, if, for example, I'm at a place right now that I have used the word lily white, and I came from Arizona, so I really see it now. So they're not always that diverse, and they're trying to be more diverse, and in their case, using that would be a bad idea because they would get more of the same, which is not what they want.
Not in the thing that I'm thinking about wasn't in the context of mentoring, but a nomination process is really nice, because I think that if you have somebody nominate and say this student would really benefit from this relation, or like you nominate and somebody calls you out and say you would be good, it makes them feel good and they would opt to do it.
That is a fantastic idea, and I have been finding lately that is where I'm moving to.
Yeah.
Is that you've been nominated, and now you need to fill out this sort of application, survey, or whatever, so they can show their intent. But especially working, thank you so much. She knew I had water over there, and I left it. A nomination process makes people feel special, and especially working with underrepresented groups, sometimes you may think that your mentoring program doesn't apply to them. It's a way to make sure you pull them in. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to add that in version 2 of my book, just so you know. I'll give you credit. Put your name on there. Okay, matching. I have seen people go nuts with spreadsheets on matching. Does anybody here do that? Because we want you to stop the madness. Okay, stop the madness. We're going to help you right now. Pick, and then if it's crazy, you should pick one. But pick 2 or 3 characteristics that matter, and that's it. So we often worry, especially around diversity issues, like what's really important. Do I need to worry about major? Do I need to worry about gender? Do I need to worry about race? Do I need to worry about religion? Do I need to worry about sexual orientation? You need to think about what your goal is for your program and then pick the characteristic that matters. And because we do, as humans, we can't help it. We kind of like people who look like us. And if they don't look like us, it's okay as long as we work out we have something in common. So it ends up for successful relationships, what really matters are in the end, are their values, shared values. But demographics can get in the way of that initially sometimes. Communication preferences might be really important. So pick whatever that is. So if it might be major for your program, then you try to match people based on that. And then how much input? And this is something I've really changed my thinking about from a lot of experience and reading a lot of the research. The fact is, if you assign people, it's still voluntary. And even required mentoring, people are very clever. They're suddenly busy, or they forgot, or they had this thing. So I've been recommending people to do this recently, and it's been very effective. Tell them it's their tentative assignment. And then they can tell you, they can opt out, and they almost never do, but they feel they have more choice. And having the feeling of choice gives them some autonomy and engagement and investment that ends up is very important. So you could do speed mentoring to kind of have people match. You could have mixer events. You kind of need to think through, how do you want to get people together? Because it could be that you let them all meet and do some quick sort of mentoring rounds and rank their top couple people, and then you match based on that. So your goal for matching is to get people, here's a couple other things I'm going to say about matching, which are, how similar do you want them to be, or is some difference good? And increasingly researchers think, you want some difference, because that's part of the openness of exposing you to new ideas, new ways of thinking. So the hard part for you is going to be to figure out, well, what matters that they should be the same on? But you don't want them to be the same on everything, because then why have a mentor? And increasingly, I have a colleague, she's moved now to North Carolina. I don't know, what is it? We're all moving coast. She was in California, now she's come to North Carolina. Glory was out Texas, she moved here. I don't know. She has done some work about networks that is very interesting. So how many of you have a mentor? Okay, that's good. How many of you have more than one? Well, there's a whole exercise where I've had people do before, and she's done this as well, that sometimes people say they have multiple mentors, but they're all from, say, the same department. And when they're all from the same department, they're giving the same perspective, the same access to information, so it's really like having one mentor. So this idea of openness is really quite important when we think about it, because at the end of the day, what's mentoring actually doing? Yeah, but why do we have formal programs to do it? Why don't people just get together? Why do we formalize it? Yes?
Perhaps they wouldn't meet in any other way.
Okay, they wouldn't meet in any other way. And why would we care about that?
It's a learning opportunity.
That they couldn't otherwise get? Okay.
Maybe parts of it are challenging.
Parts of what are challenging?
Parts of the mentoring relationship.
Oh, so they wouldn't
Sharing
stick
that
together?
openness
Okay.
And engaging in that. Possibly.
And they couldn't do it on their own? But why do you want them to be accountable?
So that it happens, and they probably wouldn't do it on their own.
Because they wouldn't do it on their own, but what's happening that they wouldn't, what are they getting that they wouldn't get?
Commitment. Diverse perspectives are different.
Connection, diverse perspectives, what did you say?
Commitment.
Commitment? So you think none of these people would get commitment, diverse perspectives, or connection were it not for your magical mentoring program? And I'm just asking. Remember I told you I was the friendly critic. I'm just asking. I'm going to stop here just because she's closer. Then I'm coming over there. Okay, go.
Oh, I was just going to say, I feel like, I'm not sure if I'm getting at the right answer.
I don't know that I have a right
an
answer.
answer that you're looking for, but the idea that everybody's trying to achieve things, and sometimes there's power in numbers or strength together, and if you have someone, looking ahead to questions you're going to come to, or troubleshooting things that the mentor's experienced in and you're not, then you can actually become more productive and more engaged and do greater things if you have sort of like a navigator with you, I guess.
Okay,
Does
some
that make
supporter
sense?
to kind of help you stay stuck together.
Well, no, it's not stuck to the mentor. Actually, almost the opposite, in that giving you the wings to fly on your own faster
Okay.
and more effectively. I don't know.
Okay, all right. Now, all right, faster and more effectively, what were you going to say?
If it's formal, it's intentional.
Yes, formal is intentional.
So usually, if you're having, it's intentional for, if you're talking about in a career, for instance, situation where maybe you have someone who needs to figure out how to do something, so you have someone you can intentionally have that discussion with. It's not just by virtue of networking and saying, oh, you happen to have this going on too. It's very intentional, and then it's intentional from the mentor's part because they can then bring up things or provide ideas, resources to the person they might not be aware of. So it's a very intentional relationship, intentional about what your goals are, as opposed to, hey, I'm networking with you and we happen to have something in common that you can help me with.
Okay. And you think it wouldn't otherwise happen perhaps that way?
I think networking can, because people make that commitment to do that. But if you are calling it a formal mentoring relationship, then yes, it's very intentional.
Okay, well, let's have one more and I'll tell you what I'm thinking. I don't have the right answer. I'm just going to tell you what I think. You're spending a lot of time on it. And you must think something's going to happen that wouldn't happen otherwise. And why do we care about all that? Yes, Matt?
So I did miss a little bit of your question, but, sorry.
Well, we can't wait now to hear what you're going to say. Go.
No,
I know, it's going to be good.
No, so I'm launching a peer mentor program for first-gen students.
Okay, and I'm one of those, so I'm all down with that.
Can I give you a fist pump?
Yeah.
Thank you. Nice. No, but the thing that's interesting about first-gen, right, is that they need connectivity. Right?
Yes.
They have difficulty.
All right, Matt's getting there. Okay,
no,
keep going.
okay, but they need to be connected. But where do they go to get information a lot of times?
Where do they go?
Call their parents?
Yes, who don't know anything because they didn't go to college.
Right, or their peers.
Okay, who may or may not be educated
Correct.
about what they should be doing.
The problem that we're finding with first-gen students is that their peers also don't have a sense of information. And there's a sense of, I don't belong here. Why they made a mistake in letting me into college.
Yes, and furthermore, we just know that they don't get very good career support, which is exactly what they need to stay in school, right?
So I think the thing that I see in terms of peer mentor for this particular group is that giving them a sense of, hey, this is what's available to you, in a way that they're not afraid to ask for the help that they need, okay? So trying to get past that deficit sort of mentality and knowing that, hey, this is what I did and you can do it too. Sort of a sense of motivation in a way that's not scary.
Okay. I think we should give Matt a hand for trying to put this all together under my deep pressure. Somebody over here was gonna add something. Yes? I'm gonna come back to what you're saying, because I think Matt's on to what my point is about why bother doing all this work.
I see it as, why should we bother? Because what happens if it's not there?
What does happen?
So I'm more worried about.
So you've got the I'm saving save the world.
No,
You're
no, no,
saving.
no.
Okay, no. I'm just asking. You look like that Barbie doll that was on that video. No, I'm giving you a hard time. Go ahead. Go. I do too, by the way, so it's okay.
The bad mentoring or lack of mentoring will lead to worse stuff than us trying and providing formal mentoring.
All right, well, you got a lot in there, I would say, right? That's a lot of pressure. Oh, I don't need this one. That's a lot of pressure on mentoring. I mean, I would argue it's all about, one of two things is happening for all college mentoring programs. One is access to what I would say social capital. And I think a lot of what you guys are trying to do is that. They won't otherwise have access to those systems, those people, those opportunities, because if they did, they'd get together informally. The first gen person would not be afraid. I've had this conversation a million times with students. Well, but the faculty doesn't want to speak to me. What were you going to say?
I think mentoring really should be good for us too, we who are faculty or whatever our job description, so that we understand our students. College can be scary and it's not always a supportive place, and we just know how to show up in class and we all succeeded, right? We earned our degrees, we got our initials after our name, but we need to understand their challenges. We need to be in that relationship to be better educators.
Well, I am of shared perspective with you on that, but I'm sure you will agree with me that all of our faculty colleagues are not.
I would agree, but I'm not here to agree.
No, that's, of course, right? But I would say that in college, and it's important to think about, at some level, that's connecting you with people you wouldn't otherwise, especially when we're thinking about from the mentee perspective. I agree. We used to call the Arizona program we did a stealth diversity program, because it ends up that most of the overwhelmingly white faculty learned a lot about students of color, and they would never have come to a diversity program. But they would come to mentor training. And it ends up when we did evaluation, they did learn a lot and they changed some practices in their classroom, et cetera. So I absolutely agree with you that mentors can learn too, but at the end of the day, we're often either trying to connect people with formal programs. So in the 80s, it started in the United States, it was women, and it was because of lawsuits and companies of why they were not getting up to the top, and they sued. So then those companies said, oh, dagnabbit, let's just have some mentoring programs. We can tell them that was part of those lawsuits that came out of the 80s. So often, you should think about what is it they need access to that they're not otherwise getting? Because if they'd already get it, you don't need to do it in your program. The other way I think it often plays out in colleges is for talent development, so honors programs or research mentoring. So those are, for whatever your background is, we have this precious resource and we want them to be our future doctors, physicists, biochemists, whatever. And we therefore are giving them mentoring to help really grow their talent so they'll go on to graduate school, et cetera. But really thinking about this issue of access and social capital is important when we're thinking about matching, because at the end of the day, we're trying to connect people with people they wouldn't otherwise connect with. All right, that was a lot on matching, so let us keep on briefing. All right, I call it briefing because lately I've been thinking orientation and all that sounds like people talking at you. And I think what most of us want are programs where people are interacting with one another, and actually modeling that when we do a briefing kind of suggests that it's the latest and greatest information. I am a fan of everybody attending, because otherwise, especially when we're working with certain populations, they think, what's this privileged knowledge that the mentors are getting that I'm not? And don't you want your mentees to maybe be mentors in the future? So I just toss them all in there for the most part. But sometimes that doesn't make sense. But thinking about who should come, what will you cover, and I'm going to talk a little bit more on ethical principles because I think that's so important. We've talked about high quality program goals and expectations. And I do believe that you need to tell people what a high quality relationship looks like so they know. And they're intentional then about engaging in those kinds of activities. And finally, the format. So thinking about, is it in person? Can I tape part of this? And we all have these learning systems now. I'm sort of amazed at how, actually I think Jen and you guys have made this super duper one you're going to talk about later, right? About mentor training that's online or mentee training. So they're going to tell you all about that. There's a growing number of resources, so there's no reason not to have some training or briefing for folks. God, I want to stop saying training too. Who wants to be trained? No one wants to be trained. Ethics, ooh, it's kind of hard to see, but it's on the worksheet, so you can write it down. Autonomy, beneficence, fidelity, justice, non-malfeasance. This is my good friend Brad Johnson at the Naval Academy, writes a lot about ethics and mentoring. And here, we can all sort of sort out the obvious stuff. Although, I would say if you're working with undergraduates, the whole issue of like inappropriate sexual relations, I think, should not be underestimated. And you might need to tell especially your peer mentors about that. But normally this stuff creeps in very subtly. And I think having a couple of examples that your folks might do in a briefing would help them think a little bit about this. So for example, how might keeping confidences be an ethical obligation I have as a mentor that I might violate without thinking about it? Does anybody have an example of that? Yes.
Sometimes in small communities, you might have a student that applies to Harvard, but then they don't get in. But you had bragged about how your student applied to Harvard, and then it's really detrimental to that student who has to explain to everybody, oh, well, I didn't get in, over and over again.
That is a fantastic example, and something that probably the person's trying to think they're doing a favor. They're bragging about it, but now because they have this privileged knowledge, they put the person in a very difficult situation. That's a fantastic example. What about equal opportunities in treatment? Can anybody think of an example of how we could violate that unintentionally? I guess I'm a lot more creative than you guys are. People have told me all their bad tormentor stories. Here's how it plays out. Maybe you're mentoring somebody that, oh, do you have one? Oh, let's hear it. So please, I want to add to my collection.
I work specifically with students with disabilities and previously did that in a health sciences settings, and I can't tell you the number of times I heard mentors or leaders talk about someone with fill-in-the-blank disability can't possibly be in this kind of field, and so they're shutting the door and sending that message out. And so if they're in a relationship with a student or a potential student or a recruit or whatever it is, you've already shot.
That is a fantastic example, and exactly the kind of thing I'm thinking about is because they had more knowledge about that person, they sort of predetermined their access to an opportunity that they wouldn't have done if they didn't maybe know that. And it can also play out with like scholarships or people on need-based aid. Well, they already have that need aid, so they don't need this whatever travel stipend, so I'm not going to recommend it to them. And they maybe wouldn't have done that had they not known them so well. And of course, my favorite, do no harm. Now, do no harm is why I think that it's important to have some evaluation, especially for formal mentoring, and check-ins early on. So we saw in the program, the big program we did in Arizona, that what was happening is some people weren't getting together, and everybody was feeling bad about that. The mentee was like, I wrote the faculty member a couple times, they didn't really respond, and did I do something wrong? And now we've put them in a situation where they're not feeling very good about themselves. Or the faculty member who would say, well, I've reached out several times, the person never came, and I'm not really sure, I have this sort of vague sense of, being very unhelpful, and I'm not quite sure why. So making sure that our programs also are in a way to support people to be successful and do no harm is really important. Okay, so here's the takeaway. Really have tight your theory of change, and I would suggest a logic model as a way to do that. Engage all your stakeholders in sort of talking about, are we in agreement this is really what our goal is? Is it sense of belonging, or is it sense of belonging on the way to keeping them in college? Shop it around and use it as a decision guide, because you can see then how that will make it easy to decide about recruitment, matching, briefing, your activities, evaluation. Any questions about this part? My gosh, this time is flying. Okay, fast. Supporting mentoring, learning conversations. I just want to share with you a couple things about this, and I'm going to ask you to answer these questions in your mind. When you were in school, did you focus on the grade you would receive? Yes or no? Did you feel bad if you earned a poor grade on a quiz? Yes or no? Yes. Yeah, okay. Anybody know? Come on. Okay, that's why your mentoring program's so lousy. No, I'm kidding. What mentoring program? Is this workshop about mentoring? I don't know about that. Did anybody ever take a course or workshop because it sounded interesting, even though you thought you might get a different grade, lower grade? Anybody ever do that? Okay. And if you ever attended a professional conference, anybody attended a session outside your interest or expertise? Okay. Who's heard of mindset? If you haven't, I recommend this to you. I'm going to hit it really quickly as a way to help you think about educating your people to talk with one another. What they say matters a lot, the feedback they give. And basically, here's a very short summary of it. You will all tell me if I've got it wrong, since so many of you are familiar with it. It doesn't matter if you never experience a challenge. Your mindset doesn't matter. You're successful. It's irrelevant. Where mindset matters most is when you run into difficulty, a bad grade, a difficult major, whatever it is, problems at home, and then your explanation about that difficulty affects your effort. So, this is a classic one. I'm in math, I'm a guy, I failed the test, and I say the teacher's an idiot. It's no problem for me to go back to the class because I think the teacher's the idiot, not me. My explanation is external to myself. It might be right or wrong. The guy might be brilliant, but my point is my explanation is a way that lets me continue to work hard. Women often want to go, well, I'm not smart. I'm the idiot. Well, if you think you're an idiot, why should you keep trying? Because it won't matter because you're an idiot. So the value of mentoring often is helping people change their self-talk about explaining events, especially challenges. And the idea of mindset is to help them understand, well, I don't know, maybe you are an idiot. How did you get into college? You tricked everyone. You explore it with them. You look at it with that person and help them think about some other explanations, like maybe you are an idiot, I don't know. Because it gives them some freedom to go, oh, okay, probably I'm not an idiot. It's the teacher, the class, I wasn't prepared. Because if you can move them off that explanation and believing it has to do with effort, I didn't study as hard, then they're willing to put in the effort, and in the end, having that learning mindset or growth mindset will help them continue to have effort. Feed forward. This is a fantastic exercise to do with folks instead of feedback. The problem with feedback is we all get really defensive about it. I mean, and I teach this stuff and I do. You're like, oh, Laura, I wish you had done that other. Really? I don't want to do it that way. You know, that's what we're thinking in our head. As we get to be grown-ups, we're a lot nicer about it. So feed forward is awesome because you can have people in pairs, quick pairs, do the following. Think about, now if I had time, we just talked so much that I just ran straight out. My goal is, and you might have a goal for your mentoring program, you go to 3 to 5 people, and that you just tell them, my goal is I want to do better in whatever. They have to have a thing they want to do. And then you get some advice super quick. And some of it may be very good, and some of it might be terrible, but you listen. Because your only thing you're supposed to do is say thank you. And by just telling them your only thing is to say thank you, you stop with all the, oh, I tried that, it didn't work, blah, blah, blah. And you actually open a learning space for people to take and think about other opportunities. So there's a lot of research on this. It's called Feed Forward, and I recommend that to you. And this is really fun to do with peer mentoring. Anyone heard of appreciative inquiry? Okay, good. If you don't know appreciative, raise your hand, it's really high. If you don't know appreciative inquiry, you should go and talk to these people who do. I'm going to give you the quick version about it, which says we live in a world our questions create. And so the skill of the mentor is about asking good questions. Again, promoting reflection and learning spaces. And that we want to focus on positive life-giving questions. So these might be questions when people first get together that help people get together quickly, but are important. What's your most successful learning experience from someone else? What did that look like? What did you do in that? And having the mentee even hear about that from the mentor would be incredibly useful for the mentor to sort of explain, oh, this is how I did this. This is how I participated and entered in that relationship. The more details you can have about it, the better. Because they really visualize that. And then to back up, well, what did you contribute to that experience? What did you do? And then thinking about, okay, now we're going to talk about our relationship. What are some commonalities in what we've shared? How might that influence how we work together? Because we visualized a time when it was really successful, and now we're going to apply that. We sort of dreamed about that. We've shared that. Now we're going to talk about what we might do together. But it's much more natural than just going, oh, how are we going to engage? How can I help you? Sometimes it feels forced to people. So giving them some tools to get started. Okay, so I want you to all think of, and just jot this down for yourself. If we had a reunion next year, what would you tell us that went so well in your program? What would be super fantastic that you would be really proud about? And I would like you just to write it down. You too, buddy. Just one thing. It shouldn't be hard because things are so bad. Yeah. Just one thing. I want you to write that down. I'm going to end with this comic here. I love Dilbert. This one is, I need some mentoring, and he goes, well, this is a little awkward. On the one hand, helping you would make me appear wise and generous. And on the other hand, it would make you a much more credible threat to my job. So I see you more as an adversary than a subordinate, so that's why I'm going to withhold any vital information, and I've already said too much. So the guy goes back and he goes, did you learn anything? And he says, yes, unfortunately. You can learn from bad mentoring experiences. Actually, I've done a whole study on that, TOR mentors, but it's not the best way to learn. And I would really hope that I've given you some tips today to think about fantastic mentoring. This book on the top, you can actually download for free, Mentoring Undergraduate Students. I just wrote that with Gloria. So that might be helpful to some of you about just what are the functions, forms, outcomes, sort of a survey recently of the literature. And then, of course, I've written a whole handbook on mentoring programs, which I've tried to cram into an hour and a half, some of it for you. And hope that I've at least given you one or two good ideas to take back to your own work. I want to commend you for the work you're doing. I obviously think mentoring is important, and want to help people to do it spectacularly well. And another fist bump, dude, for like first gen people. All right. Thank you so much, and thanks to the conveners for putting this all together. It's really
all right.
fantastic.
Well, thank you so much.